Welcome to Vermont Today. I'm Terry Geralman, your host, and my guests this time are Diane Snelling and Dick McCormick. Diane is the Republican, one of the Republican senators representing Chittenden County in the Vermont State Senate, and Dick McCormick is elected to the Vermont State Senate as a Democrat from Windsor County. I have been a member of the Progressive Party State Committee for the past 6 years. So we represent all three major parties in Vermont. And today we're going to talk about Death with Dignity. The Death with Dignity bill was introduced last year, and it's going to be it's being introduced again for this legislative session, which began on Wednesday, and will hopefully be passed by the end of April. Diane, how did you first become, would you like to tell the viewers something about your background, since this show is viewed perhaps in other parts of the state where you might not be so well known, and how you became first interested in the Death with Dignity issue?
Sure. Actually, it started at home. My mother was an early and very vocal proponent for the legislation and worked very hard, and that was before I was in the Senate. And I also have a very large number of constituents in Chittenden County who are very much in favor of it, and I learned about it through them and came to know exactly why they feel it's necessary, and I agree, and what the safeguards are in the legislation.
And your father was governor of Vermont for many years, too, right?
Yes, he was, yes.
And Dick, would you like to tell our viewers something about your background and how you became interested in Death with Dignity?
Okay, and of course, it's sort of two separate questions. I mean, my background is I'm an adjunct instructor in the state college system in history, to history and government. I'm the grandfather of two fine young women, father of two fine young men. I was saying earlier, they know me as Papa Dick is my name in the family. How I got interested in this issue is I've always been interested in personal freedom issues, and it's just an intuitive abrasion to me when the government, which is very good at some things, takes it upon itself to meddle into things that are really none of its business. And certainly when a person is dying, I think they're entitled to make their own decisions without interference from outside.
I became interested when I realized what the situation was at the end of life for many people. It's absolute torture. The last 2 weeks of life can be immensely painful, and I've talked to doctors that I know, and they tell me that it's impossible to alleviate the pain in many cases, and the only way they can do it is by putting the person totally to sleep. So whenever the person is awake, they're in pain. And if someone knows that they're going to die in 2 weeks or even in 6 months, why should they be forced to go through pain like that? So this bill will give them the option to ask a doctor to allow them to terminate their lives before they have to suffer the ultimate.
Well, one of the best things I think is that throughout the country is that we're increasing access to hospice care, which to me is a perhaps not intuitive, but actually a side benefit, if you will, of the discussion around this kind of legislation, because it is about all of the things that happen at the end of your life, whether you are suffering from a terminal disease or not, and that we're making different choices and we're understanding what that time is like, and that people who have lived with very strong opinions and express themselves very directly want to see their lives end in the same fashion.
I think it's important, you've used the word choice several times, and the bill is called the Patient Choice Bill, is that this is about people making their own choice. It's not as though the bill does not speak to the question of what is the best way to die. It speaks to the question of whose choice is it?
True.
Because there are many people, in fact, in Oregon, where it is legal for a person to hasten his or her death, most people don't do that. You have the choice of going the full route if that is what you choose to do. And so the bill is really about empowering people, or no longer disempowering people at the end of life. And when you mention hospice care, for example, and palliative care, Oregon, where this is legal, is not only does not only have acceptable palliative care, it's exceptional. It's a leader in the country in palliative care and hospice care.
And it's actually improved since they passed the bill. They passed the
Yes.
bill in 1998, so it's been in effect now for 14 years, I think.
Yes.
And hospice care has been improved since then.
And there's a tendency, not just in this, on most issues, people often kind of bifurcate an issue. It's either this or that. You know, well, instead of allowing people to hasten an inevitable and imminent death, instead of doing that, we should have better hospice care. Actually, you can do both. And in fact, you should do both. And in Oregon, they do both.
And that was the point exactly I was trying to make. And I just wanted to clarify that for me, one of the most important things about this legislation is that, and I've said this in the past, is that this is not about choosing death, because in fact, death or illness that will cause death has already chosen you, in a sense, and that you are dealing with how you go forward on that.
The bill has many protections, too. We're copying the Oregon bill, I believe.
Yes.
And they require that the person be a citizen, consult 2 doctors, make a written request, and there's a 15-day waiting period between the first request and the second request.
Yep.
And so there's many, also anyone under 18 can't make use of the bill. And I think the average age of the people that used the bill in Oregon was mid to late 60s. So it's not being used by young people who are depressed. It's really being used by older people who are.
It can't be used by young people who are depressed. That's not what it says. The bill addresses someone who is at the end of his or her life from a condition that is incurable and in which death is imminent within 6 months in a physician's judgment. So the idea of there are those who actually have said to me, well, Pete, this is going to confuse our adolescents. They're going to think it's okay to kill themselves because the girlfriend left them. But that's not what the bill is talking about, you know. And it's our job as adults, if they're teenagers getting confused, it's our job to disabuse them of their confusion, to clarify what is actually the law and what is not. Yeah.
I was just going to say, maybe we should sort of roll it back a little bit and let's talk about what the bill does.
Just the over the 30,000 foot.
Yes, because I think it's very important for people to understand that you need to have been diagnosed with a terminal illness, and that the diagnosis needs to have been that you will presumably die within 6 months. And you need to have 2 doctors say that that's the case. And then you as the individual that wishes to take advantage of this legislation would need to do a number of things. So there's nothing quick about this in terms of its process. It's a very measured, thoughtful way for somebody to make that choice.
Yeah, the 30,000 foot view, what the bill would do is Vermont would adopt Oregon's policy where a person in this situation may initiate, and the patient has to initiate this process. A doctor cannot suggest it, although he might inform a patient of what the law is. But the patient has to request a prescription for medication, which, if self-administered, would hasten this patient's death. And we were talking at the very beginning of the show, you know, about pain, and it's very, very clear that there are kinds of end-of-life pain that cannot be managed. Some people will very glibly say, oh, well, we can manage all pain. No, they can't. And doctors will tell you that they can't. Although they probably can manage most. However, there are other aspects of end of life that might lead someone to think, since I'm at the end of my life anyway, I really do choose to have it end today rather than next Wednesday, which is really what this is. I don't want any more of this suffering. Suffering is things other than pain. It's humiliation and degradation. It's disability. we'll talk at some point, I presume, about what's called terminal sedation, which a person is probably a painless enough death, but although not entirely painless, but it's also a loss of dignity. People worry a great deal about a loss of dignity. They don't want to die unconscious and helpless at the hands and totally at the mercy of others.
Most of the people in Oregon who have used the bill were cancer patients. And when we think of cancer, we often think of, well, it's lung cancer, or maybe it's breast cancer. But by the time you get to the point where you're terminal, it's metastasized. So it almost always includes also, I think, bone cancer, which is one of the most painful, enormously painful death from bone cancer. And but there are some other terminal diseases that the bill doesn't help, which is a sort of a downside to the bill, that if you have Alzheimer's or if you have Lou Gehrig's disease, the bill's not going to help you, I think, because Alzheimer's patients, when they, at the end, they're not mentally competent to make the choice.
And under this law, you have to be mentally competent.
Yes. And Lou Gehrig's disease, they're not physically able to administer the Nembutal, I think, is the drug that they use. They're not able to administer it themselves. So they're not helped by the bill. So the bill is not a cure-all. But it's a big thing for cancer, because cancer is the number 2, I think the number 2 cause of death in the United States. And the number 1 cause is heart problems. But deaths from heart disease, I believe, is not one of the worst forms of death, but death from cancer is.
Although end-of-life suffering with a heart condition can be, I generally try to resist just personal family anecdotes, but I did have a relative who died simply in old age of congestive heart failure. And there were horrible periods of suffocation where she once said to me, "I'm not afraid of dying. If any one of these episodes kills me, I can accept that. I'd like to live forever, but I can accept that I will die. What I dread is going through one of these and coming out of it and knowing I'm going to have to go through it yet again." The episode of, and that was a heart issue.
Well, and I've heard very compelling personal stories about people suffering with brain cancer, where is another situation where you really can't alleviate the pain without totally sedating somebody, and then there's no quality to that time. So, I mean, I think there are many situations where this could be a consideration, but as in Oregon, very few people actually take advantage of it, because the relief that they feel in being able to control something which none of us have control over, which is that a terminal illness, is sufficient for them to go forward. So, you know, I think that there are many laws that Senator McCormick and I contemplate that have a variety of impacts on Vermont and Vermonters, and this one has been in discussion for a number of years. And I think as we've looked at it in committee and in discussion, we've had very many thoughtful conversations about how to make the safeguards which are there in the bill, and how to respond to the questions some people have about will those safeguards work, and in which case we can look to Oregon and the experience they've had in Oregon for, is it 10 or 12 years now?
Yeah.
14
yeah.
even more, 14 years, which is a substantial amount of time to see how something evolves. And I think in Oregon that they are still very reassured, and recently now in the state of Washington, they also have similar legislation.
Yeah. There is that, and Diane, you and I both know from our years as legislators, the difference between the purely theoretical and then the real world. If this were 15 years ago and we were in Oregon and we were going into uncharted territory, the various scary what-ifs would weigh very heavily on my mind. You know, what if this happens? What if it's been the law in Oregon for years, and none of the scary what-ifs have happened. Some of the scary what-ifs always struck me as rather foolish anyway. What if the greedy heirs put pressure on grandma to end it so they can, first of all, it's never happened, but why would it? So they'll inherit 2 weeks earlier? You know, it doesn't,
Well, I think
it doesn't but it hasn't been a problem.
But I do think because we are all supportive of this, we also have to make the effort to be additionally compassionate and willing to listen to those who have those concerns so that we can address those concerns adequately.
Well, those concerns are serious and deserve answers, but at this point, the answers do come from Oregon, which is this has been the law, and it's not a problem because the safeguards, the bill, the main thrust of the bill is quite simple. If at the end of your life you are competent, you have sound mind, and you choose to hasten your death rather than go through a miserable end, you have the right to get a prescription from a willing physician and use it yourself if you choose to. That's a pretty simple thing. The bill is, most of the bill is safeguards. It's reassurances against anything that could possibly go wrong. And certainly Oregon has done a lot of work for us. We can just kind of ride piggyback on their efforts, is that the discussion was raised every possible negative scenario, and they're all
in a
addressed.
Respectful way.
Yes,
I think,
absolutely.
Yeah,
and that also speaks to why do we not allow, for example, for someone with Alzheimer's, that we require you be of sound mind. Well, why don't we make an exception for Alzheimer's? It has to be self-administered. Well, what about someone with ALS? And this is exactly what Senator Snelling is talking about, is we need to be sensitive. However convinced we are that we're doing the right thing, we have to be sensitive to how profoundly troubling this is to many people. Mm-hmm. So this is quite a limited right. It's a very limited step forward for the state to take. And that's largely out of respect to the sensitivities of people who may not think this is such a good idea.
As Diane mentioned, I think less than half of the people who receive the prescription from the doctor actually use it. So it offers security that someone knows that if it gets too bad, they have that prescription there, but over half of them don't end up using it. They die of natural causes.
I think it's even fewer than that. I think it's almost like 1 in 10 actually use
that may
it.
be.
Yeah. And that's well, I mean, the impulse to keep living is powerful, and I think the people who do use this, as Diane mentioned earlier, this isn't a matter of choosing death over life. It's where death has chosen you. That's if given the choice, you'd live. But since that's not going to happen, choosing the manner of death, even there's an impulse to keep going. And you don't want to give it up easily. Some people get to the point where their level of misery is such that they feel they have to take that option. But what we also know is that for the people who get the prescription and don't use it, the knowledge that they have that option is a comfort. Mm-hmm. First of all, they're still empowered, and secondly, again, I say I don't like falling back on personal family anecdote, but I watched my father die of cancer when I was a kid, and it should come as no surprise that I am haunted by that image, and every little mole is, oh my God, that's the end. The idea that I might someday endure what he endured is very frightening. And I have enough of a survival instinct, I probably would go the full route. However, it is a great comfort to know that maybe I don't have to. That will not be forced upon me by fate.
Well, we deal with many issues in Montpelier that there are a variety of opinions on, and the process that we use and have used on this is similar, which is we listen to testimony and we hear from all perspectives, and then have full and diverse discussions about it. And generally speaking, then we vote. And one of the things that I hope will happen this year is that we will vote on this bill, which unfortunately we have not gotten to yet in the Senate. And I think that that's an important piece of why we continue to talk about it, is because we would like to see this legislation pass, and trying to persuade as many people that the safeguards are there, that the certainty is there from the experience in Oregon and in Washington, and continue to have the due process, if you will, for any legislation.
What happened to the bill last year? It didn't get voted on, or it didn't get out of committee?
It's complicated. You want to?
Well, I brought it up, so I mean, I guess that's my point, is that for me, part of the fundamental part of democracy is that in being chosen to represent Vermonters, Senator McCormick and I do the best we can within the system which is set forward, and that asks for a committee discussion and then a vote out of committee to bring it to the floor. Last biennium, this bill came to the floor by a circuitous method, which I hope we will not repeat. And that it really, by all guides, should go both to the Committee of Judiciary and the Committee on Health and Welfare for testimony and discussion before it comes to the floor. And I hope that that is what will happen this year. And we've had a lot of discussions about reorganizing and remembering the due process and the appropriate protocols and following the rules in the Senate this year. And I hope that we will, because to me it's very important for the people of Vermont to understand that we make those decisions in a thoughtful way, that we follow the process that allows them to be part of it. And when you do things in you bring a bill out of committee and try to attach an important piece of legislation like this to some other piece of legislation, that's really not appropriate. And I want everybody to know that the bill passed because it went through the right process.
As one of those who was involved in this, you're very kind when you say circuitous. The clumsy process that we used last year was that the committee, one of the two committees of jurisdiction, opposed the bill and did not vote it out for a vote, which is their prerogative. There were those of us, and the committee process, I'm a committee chair, and I've been a committee chair in the past, and I'm quite deferential to the committee process, but occasionally you get something where a certain number of people say, you know, we want to vote on this regardless of the committee. And what happened was an outgoing senator attached the entire Death with Dignity bill as an amendment to a tanning salon bill, which was obviously a stretch. It was a stretch. Once it came to the floor, and that wasn't me, by the way, I and several others argued for passage of it. There were procedural questions of whether it was germane, of whether or not to overrule the lieutenant governor on the question of germaneness. The fact that the bill did not pass, even though it did make it to the floor, because it made it by a circuitous route, means a lot of people voted against the bill because they were voting against the route that it had taken. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, and
Yeah,
I
that
guess
was
that's my
their vote.
point,
Yeah.
is that I want this bill to go through all of the steps that
Yeah.
any legislation needs to go through this biennium, so that when we have a vote, we know that it was completely on its own.
And you know, people, your viewers may remember that just recently we have elected our president pro tempore, who's the leader of the Senate. And Senator Campbell has actually said that it is his intention. He probably will vote against the bill. I can't speak for him, but he probably will. He has opposed it in the past, but that he would not block the debate of the bill, that he would allow a debate and a vote. And that has been a fairly public promise that he's made on the basis of which he was elected as pro tem. So I expect we will have a vote on the floor.
People would probably like to know which committees you're on. You're chairman of the Judiciary? Education Committee.
And I serve on the Health and Welfare.
So Health and Welfare is one of the committees
Yes.
where the bill, and you're on...
Well, last biennium, I was on the Judiciary Committee, which reviewed the bill in a very abbreviated way, which I guess is my other point, is I don't want, simply because we've reviewed this legislation in the past, I want it to have its full process. I don't want to have an abbreviated process because now we're hurried to see that it goes forward. I want everything to follow the rules. And I am currently now back on natural resources in the morning, and I remain on appropriations in the afternoon. So those are...
But you're on the Judiciary Committee also?
No,
No.
I am no longer on Judiciary.
It's a new session.
So...
The bill's already been introduced, I believe, hasn't it?
Actually, that was kind of what I was leading up to, is that we had talked before the program about who was the lead sponsor, and at this point we don't know. I don't believe the bill has been formally introduced this year. It will be my hope that we get everyone who will support it to be a co-sponsor, so that by its very introduction you will see what the votes are.
But last year you were both co-sponsors of the bill.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we will be again.
Yeah.
So the first step is introducing the bill, and then it goes into, does it go to both committees at once?
It gets assigned to the committees, and one committee could have it and then pass it forward to the other committee.
There's
has a variety
generally there is a committee of primary jurisdiction. This is essentially a health and welfare bill. It does, however, have language that the Judiciary Committee has jurisdiction over. So what happens often is a bill will start in one committee, and then it will go to another committee, whose jurisdiction probably ought to. The rules get bent all the time, but theoretically, if the Finance Committee takes a bill in, they're only interested in the finances. They shouldn't be looking at the policy in the bill. The Judiciary Committee should probably look at the immunities section. There are parts of the bill that rewrite part of the criminal law, and that certainly is the jurisdiction of the Judiciary Committee. They ought to have it, and they ought to make a judgment on it. They, in my view, and again, this is not black and white stuff, I am of the opinion that a committee of primary jurisdiction should not vote a bill out adversely. If they think it's a bad bill, they shouldn't vote it out. That's their job as a committee to make that judgment. You vote it out with a positive recommendation, or you don't do it at all. But a committee that is, for example, if a health and welfare bill goes to judiciary for judiciary purposes, that they would have I think would be entirely legitimate to vote it out with an adverse recommendation, if that is the judgment of the committee. If they say, we don't like this, but we'll let there be a vote. Bottling it up can be very frustrating for people, especially on something that really matters a great deal to some people.
But after the bill is introduced, the first step is it goes into the committee.
Yes.
And it goes on the wall, and somehow it has to get off the wall. Many bills don't make it off the wall.
Most bills,
Most
bills get a courtesy, but they don't get thoroughly vetted. It's
Right, and I think
priorities.
this legislation, Terry, is known to be of very significant importance to many senators. So it would be really a misstep not to take it up. The question is, when will it be taken up in a committee's priorities? And that's what we're in the process of deciding in the next few weeks, is how we will, what legislation we will attempt to work on this session and complete. So that's still a little undecided. But I know that this bill has been noted as one of the top priorities for many senators.
Early in a session, each committee has a kind of round the
Right.
committee table discussion of what is everyone's priority, what do you want to do. Obviously, the chair has more of a say than everyone else, but a good committee chair, I count myself as one.
And I would
Thank you.
concur, having
you.
served
Thank you,
under
Senator.
you
Yeah.
as a committee.
Is that you pay deference to your committee. You don't, you have, one of the smart use of power is knowing when not to use it. A committee chair actually has the unilateral power to kill any bill he wants, or she wants, just leave it on the wall.
See, now I
But
would
you
disagree,
don't
but
do that. But my point
you
is,
don't do it. You
don't
could,
do that.
but you don't,
Don't
right.
use that power. No, you give deference to your committee. They were elected to.
So being on the Health and Welfare Committee, you can guarantee that it's going to come off the wall.
Me personally?
Yeah, because one senator on the committee?
Yeah, sure.
I-
I mean, because you know that the other.
Yes, I mean, it'll be taken up. It'll be taken up probably fairly early in the session. We'll at least begin the process.
But if it's debated in that committee for 3 months,
No.
then there might not be time for the judiciary.
That's right. No, we will give a thorough vetting. First of all, committees are supposed to give a thorough vetting to every line of every bill anyway. Every bill that we decide to take up. Certainly before you vote a bill out, you should have a basis for that decision. But in particular, something where there is controversy. There are people who don't want to do this, and they have to be answered.
And I guess I just want your listeners to understand that is really very, it's critical to the process of accepting the actions that we do make on behalf of Vermonters in the Senate, is knowing that we're thoughtful about everything and we try to give the pros and cons of everything before we make a decision, that we try not to make hasty bills. We, try to hear from all perspectives and go forward. So I just wanted to be reassuring somewhat about the process any bill takes before it's passed. And obviously the Senate is only one part of what has to happen. Then the bill has to go to the House and be passed in the House, and then it would come back and the Senate would concur with whatever or not changes that have been made by the House, and then it needs to be approved by the governor. That's the follow.
Can it go in both the Senate and the House at the same time?
It can, but it's rare that one body has to have passed it for the other to officially, unless they're looking at two different versions. Am I right on that?
Yeah, I mean,
I don't want to confuse people.
A bill has to either be a House bill or a Senate bill, and it has to be passed by both houses. But obviously, both houses can, certainly with the budget, for example, constitutionally, the budget has to begin in the House. Senate appropriations doesn't sit around for 2 months waiting for the appropriations bill to come from the House. They're investigating from day one.
Right.
So you deal with it as an issue, if not as a bill. You sometimes have companion bills. You have the same bill in both houses. At some point, you decide to let one of those bills die and the other one pass. That's just a decision of what name is on the bill at that point. I think both houses will be dealing with this issue early on. I don't know that for a fact, actually. My guess is that House Health and Welfare maybe we'll have joint hearings and so on. I'm speculating, but it's a good use of time to do it.
Last year there were two bills. There was the H and a number, and there was the S and a number.
Yeah.
So maybe the House bill came afterwards, or?
I'm really not sure, Terry.
I think they were simultaneous, and I think that the politics was that this bill would have passed in the House. And it was doubtful, or at least was questionable, whether or not it would pass in the Senate. And it was simply a very reasonable, prudent political judgment by the Speaker, which is, I'm not going to have my people go on record on something controversial if nothing's going to come of it. So you go in the Senate first, pass it in the Senate, and we'll take a look at it. Because there are people who are going to get angry at whoever votes for this. And when we vote for, of course, that's true of many, many bills, that someone's going to love you for it and someone's going to hate you for it. But I can see why the House was reluctant to take up something controversial if nothing was going to happen anyway.
Do you have other questions about the specific legislation, what's in it, what's not in it?
Yes. There was one interesting part that would be in the Judiciary Committee consideration. I noticed that the bill said that a request for to terminate your life to a doctor cannot be regarded as grounds for the appointment of a guardian or a conservator.
All by itself.
All by itself.
Right.
Well, that sort of implies that that someone who advocates, suppose the bill doesn't pass, can they say, well, someone who advocated having the bill, that means that they need a guardian or a conservator?
I don't think so. I hope not. I hope that we can make that separation between consideration of legislation and actual need for a guardian.
That was really shocking to me when I read that, because
it's a safeguard, though. It's a way to say that you cannot be considered incompetent in your own decisions simply by wanting to take this option.
Yeah, but I think it is significant that the entire issue of whether or not the patient is competent is raised simply by asking for medication. Because in all other aspects of medicine, we assume the patient is competent. The default position is that we all know what we're doing. Every now and then you get a signal that maybe this person doesn't. But the doctor notices something about the patient that leads the doctor to wonder if the patient is working with all of his or her faculties. But the simple request itself, in this case, raises that issue. That is a safeguard. They're saying we're talking here about, even if it's a life that's ending anyway, we're talking about hastening the end of life, and we take it extremely seriously. that this is not being done casually. So do you understand what I'm saying, the distinction? That in every other medical procedure that I might request, the assumption is that I'm playing with a full deck. And if there's some indication that I'm not, then it raises another issue. Here we ask the question automatically simply because the request was made. And it's a matter of how seriously Oregon takes this issue. And it is a response to the concerns of people who oppose this in Oregon. And if Vermont adopts it, it'll be the same similarly. Vermont taking the issue extremely seriously and putting in very rigorous safeguards. I'm going to go beyond rigorous safeguards. Virtually, there had been no problems in Oregon. So they're effective safeguards. They are successful safeguards.
In that line too, I read that 5 out of 6 requests in Oregon for use of the bill have been denied. So it's only one chance out of 6 if you request the bill, you're going to be accepted.
Yeah, I was actually very surprised by that statistic. I would have figured there'd be a few, but that's not all. That's not because the requester was found to be incompetent. Often they're not within 6 months of the end. Someone gets a dire diagnosis and decides, okay, I'm out of it. And they say, well, no, you might have another year to live. I mean, that's the kind of thing. You're not within 6 months, so we're not going to say yes.
So some of those people were denied, and then a few months later they would be accepted.
I don't know if they were, but they could be. I mean, if you're denied because you're not within 6 months of the end, yes, then you certainly could come back later.
But many of the viewers may not understand what guardian or appointment of a guardian or conservator means. That would mean that you would lose control of all your assets.
That's right.
And the guardian would receive a fee, which could be $1,000 a month. So out of your bank account.
But it's not in the bill, Terry. Don't let people think that's in there, because it's not.
That's
well,
right.
The protection against
the protection
it,
against
There's a protection
it, yes.
against that happening is in the bill.
But
Yes.
on the other hand, people should think, you know, if this bill doesn't pass, this risk is out there. And there's been a book
No.
written.
Well, I guess I'm not sure I understand what you're saying.
Well, there was
We default to the status quo. When something is proposed and it doesn't happen, we default to the status quo. The status quo is you don't get a conservator appointed for no reason.
Well, there are many guardians and conservators appointed in Vermont. Hopefully they're really necessary, but if they were appointed on this basis, you know.
The bill does not speak to that issue except to explicitly say it's not speaking
Right,
to the issue.
right. I just want to make sure we don't confuse people about what is there and what isn't there versus what the concerns are and what the responses and safeguards are.
Right.
Okay, so in Oregon, in the 14 years, there have been about 500,000 total deaths. And out of that 500,000, only 500 have actually, 525, I think, have actually requested and received this medication. So this is really not a very big percentage of the
That's
people
right.
who are dying.
And the Oregon law has not precipitated a suicide epidemic or an influx of people into Oregon. It is the actual use of the medication is exceptional, but the knowledge that the option is there is. There's research on this. It is a comfort to people who are facing the possibility of a horrible end, that they know that they have the option of not having to endure that if they choose not to.
I also thought it was interesting that 85% of the people who have used the law in Oregon were enrolled in hospice care.
Yep.
So it's not an either or. It's something where...
It is absolutely not an either or. It's very frustrating to me. Every now and then I'll hear that argument. It's a straw man argument. Instead of doing this, we should do that. Well, actually, you can do both. And in Oregon, they do. Oregon is a leader of the nation in all aspects of end of life, not just death with dignity, the death with dignity option. They're leaders in hospice. They're leaders in palliative care.
And I'd like to see Vermont take that role also. I mean, another not either or, as it were, whatever correct grammar the one, is to say that I believe very strongly in hospice and palliative care, and that we need more, not less, and we need more informed doctors who are helping people in all aspects of difficult issues, and this is just one.
Yeah. A couple of years ago, I don't even know if she's still in this position, but the woman who was several years ago the head of hospice activities in Oregon, I had the pleasure of speaking with her. And she did say, because I want to be fair, she said, I don't like it when the Death with Dignity people claim credit for how good hospice care is in Oregon. She said, we hospice people like to take the credit for our own work, thank you. She said, however, there's no question that the argument that Death with Dignity will interfere with hospice care is not true. She said we have been able to do that, and if anything, it has helped, because having the Death with Dignity option, the discussion, I mean, here we are discussing this, we're talking about death, which people really hate doing. And I don't mean just people hate dying, they hate talking about it.
It's a hard conversation, and it's not usual in our culture.
And it puts the entire issue on the table, and that is what in fact happened in Oregon, is that they have advanced the whole range of appropriate responses to the fact that people die, and it has to be addressed.
So another safeguard would be, what happens when the doctor or the pharmacist is a Catholic and they refuse to participate?
Or for any reason. I mean, not just religion. I'm saying for any reason that they might choose not to. Then another doctor can be substituted. So a doctor or a pharmacist is allowed by this legislation to say, this is not in keeping with my conscience and I do not want to do that, then they don't have to. There's no forcing of them to participate.
This requires a willing physician and willing pharmacist.
So nobody's being forced to
Nobody's being forced. Similarly, in terms of the patient himself or herself, every now and then you hear arguments against this bill that address the question of what is the best way to die. And that's really not what the bill is about. The bill is not about what's the best way to die. The bill is whose choice is it? And I suppose there may be arguments against hastening one's own death medically. Those are arguments you could make to a person who has the choice. As it is, if this bill passes, anyone who's convinced that God will put no burden on your shoulder that he hasn't given you the strength to bear will have total freedom to die according to that belief and to go the full length. If they believe that is an option, you do it. This is a bill about empowering patients.
But we're supposed to have separation of church and state here, and freedom of religion. So no one should be forced to accept the tenets of someone else's religion.
That's right. That's right. Either way, the person the doctor who thinks this is sinful should not be forced to do it. Moreover, the person who thinks this is what they want to do, or at least they want that option, should not be prohibited because someone else thinks it's sinful. And that's the whole essence of separation of church and state in America, is that we respect one another's beliefs, and we respect one another's rights to live according to those beliefs. That's the deal.
There's a really good book that I just finished reading. It's called In Search of a Gentle Death by Richard Cote. And it goes through all of the history of Death with Dignity. And the bills were introduced in Ohio and Florida and California. And I think that it starts back in 1905 when the first bill was introduced in Ohio, I think. We mentioned Oregon. That was 14 years ago. And then subsequently, the bill was introduced in Washington, and it passed there. So those two states have legalized death with dignity by legislative action.
Actually, I think in Washington and in Oregon, it was done by public referendum.
That's right. Oregon was public referendum, and then...
I think Washington was as well.
Yeah.
Which is interesting to me, because I think in Vermont we're ahead of the curve on so many things legislatively, but we are doing this through, we don't have public referendum process to begin with, but we're doing this through legislation.
And there's another state, Montana, which has legalized death with dignity by judicial action.
Right,
Yeah.
Yep.
So that's another pathway.
Well,
guess we,
I just noticed on the back of your book it says, who owns my life?
yeah.
And I do think that that's a lot of, you know, certainly in Vermont, we're very proud of our freedom, and we're very interested in how we make certain choices in a whole variety of areas. And so this, as Senator McCormick was just saying, is really about an option and not a requirement for anyone to participate in.
That's right. The bill really is silent on the question of what is the best way to die. It's about who should control that question, who gets to answer that question. At some point, I want to talk about, every now and then we're told that we don't need this option because there are other options. We already talked about palliative care and hospice care, and that really is a straw man argument. It's a false choice that you have to do one or the other. You can do both. Another alternative that is often offered to us is what's called terminal sedation, which is actually a fairly common way for people to die. And what it is that the patient is administered medication as needed to alleviate suffering, not with the intention of hastening death. But it is as needed to alleviate suffering up to and including dosages that will end the patient's life. The ethical nicety is that the hastening of death is a byproduct, not the primary intention. And my problem with that is to maintain the ethical nicety, that this is not being done for the purpose of hastening death, it's being done to alleviate suffering. It is necessary that the patient suffer.
Well, and I think my concern about that is that it has the judgment that it's better for a doctor to decide than for the patient to decide, even when they are of sound mind. And to me, this is a very difficult place to be, where you say, well, I'm willing, in society, we're willing for doctors to make this decision, but not for ourselves.
Well, if you think about it, one of the arguments that the opponents make is that this will put us on a slippery slope to euthanasia. Terminal sedation is euthanasia. It's one person ending another. It's one person ending another person's life, and the person whose life is being ended has no role in it. It is helpless, unconscious, denied dignity, and denied volition. That's the main thing. Denied volition. The person is no longer an active agent, as opposed to what this is saying is that this has to be self-administered, or it's not going to happen, which means that the patient is in control of his or her own fate.
The people that I speak to regularly, the constituents that are in strong support of this legislation, do so from a perspective that they have made choices throughout their life that impact their life significantly in many ways, and that they should have the right to have that same kind of determination when they suffer from a terminal illness. And I keep saying this is about, you already have a terminal illness. Because that's a point that some people, it escapes some people in the conversation.
Well, the unfortunate term, physician-assisted suicide, technically, to die intentionally by one's own hand is suicide. And I'm always reluctant to get into a long semantical argument on it. If someone insists on calling it physician-assisted suicide, I accept that. But words also have connotations, and suicide.
I respect that position, but I don't understand it.
Well, the word suicide implies a choice to die, that the choice is to live or to die, and you choose to die. This applies to people who, given the choice between living and dying, choose to live. But it's a moot. You mentioned that earlier.
Right.
Today. It's a moot point because they're not going to live; they're dying.
Right.
And they're at the end. And so the question is, how do I die? Under what circumstances do I die? When exactly do I die?
And the sense of self that goes with that decision at the most difficult point in your life, where you've had autonomy throughout your life in making decisions on a variety of things, and why shouldn't our laws, our sense of justice include that?
Yeah. And you mentioned that you've got 3 political parties here. It seems to me that this has a foundation in the thinking of several different ideologies. Conservatives talk all the time about how there's too much government, that the individual and individual freedom is the primary cornerstone of a free society. And actually, there are conservative Republicans who support this because they say it's none of the government's business. That's good old conservative rhetoric. We've heard that on a variety of issues. But this is also very much a question of compassion, of why should people have to suffer when the option is there not to, and they choose to take that option.
We mentioned some of the words used are loaded too. Another one of those loaded words is euthanasia. When we talk about abortion, there's two sides. There's pro-life and then there's the pro-choice. Yeah. But most of us, I think, are pro-choice. But imagine if we were talking to a pro-lifer and they said, well, you must be pro-death.
I've had people say that to me. You're anti. I always say sarcastically, what am I, anti-life? Yeah. But there is, since you mentioned euthanasia, I think it's important that we make the distinction that this absolutely is not euthanasia. Because euthanasia involves one person ending another person's life. Out of mercy, perhaps, but it's one person ending another. This must be self-initiated and self-administered.
But that euthanasia term is loaded too because it goes back to involuntary ending of life by the Nazis. And
well,
there's a big difference between
many.
voluntary and involuntary.
Yeah. Well, you know, I mean, if you're really against something and you want to get a lot of people to join you being against it, scare them. And there are people who make this sound terribly scary. With, for example, people talk about the Netherlands. This has nothing to do with the Netherlands. This has nothing to do with euthanasia. This is about self-initiated, self-willed, self-administered
And
choice.
how, in our wonderful sense of democracy, do we promote the concept that we can have these thoughtful discussions and make changes that are sometimes controversial? I mean, to me, that's very important, to be participating in something where we're the guardians of democracy in seeing that it has that airing to have all those different opinions. I mean, I just want to make sure that people listening understand how dedicated both you and I are to that. And that there's no lightheartedness whatsoever about any legislation. I mean, when you know that it impacts many people, then you have to be very careful about how you make those decisions.
I believe there was a poll in Vermont that showed that 64% of the voters want the bill to be passed.
I believe there's very strong support. There have been a number of polls. I know in some counties it polls as high as 80%. And there's significant support for it. And I think that that's very encouraging. Because people, I read that to say that people understand what it does, they understand what it doesn't do, they understand who might use it and who cannot use it, and that they are comfortable with that and they would like to see the legislation.
It fits so well into the Vermont character, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. Flinty.
Flinty. Well, yes, Flinty, and I'll make my own decisions, thank you. That's the freedom part of freedom and unity, but also the unity part, the respect for your neighbors, the respect for others, and this notion that good fences make good neighbors, and that we not only should protect our own personal liberties, but respect the personal liberties of others, including, for example, I may have strong religious beliefs that this is a wrong thing to do.
And I can respect that.
And I will honor, I will live according to my beliefs. I will not try to impose that on you. And that kind of mutual respect is that's the unity part of freedom and unity.
But they are trying to impose it on other people when they say that people should not be free to end their lives.
That's right. That's right. And what this is saying is let's bring this law more into line with traditional Vermont, the way Vermonters like to see themselves. And I think the way Vermonters like to see themselves is actually quite accurate at times. You can get a lot, maybe no one's self-flattering self-image is always completely accurate, but I think Vermonters very much fit this notion of freedom and unity. Good fences make good neighbors, and I respect your prerogatives, and because I know you respect mine, and that's the deal.
Don't mess with me, I won't mess with
That's
you.
right. Yeah.
In the book here, you mentioned the slippery slope. They go into each detail on each of the issues. there was a question of gender. Is this going to be used more by men or women? And it turns out in Oregon, this is a 12-year study, the reality is that 53.7% of those who died under the law were men, and 46.3% were women. So it's actually used more
What's the
frequently.
percentage of population, men and women in Oregon?
I don't know.
Because it might be exactly reflective.
It's also the law of averages works better the larger the sampling, and given the sample, you're talking about people who have actually ended their lives,
Yes.
hastened their deaths. Yeah, so that's bringing you pretty close to half and half.
And Oregon is 4 times as large as Vermont, right? 4 times the
Yes.
population. This is out of about 600 people that have ended their lives.
Yeah.
And then they talk about the age, and it turns out that only 6 of 525 users, 1.1%, fell in the 18 to 34 year age group, and all 6 met all standard end-of-life disease criteria. And no one under 18 was eligible, so
That's
that they weren't included. But only 6 were in the younger age group. So
Well, fortunately, that means that terminal disease hits younger people less often, which is a good thing.
yeah. But that was one of the arguments on the slippery slope, and it just doesn't hold up. And then there's the death by underlying cause, and people with transient or deep-seated emotional or psychological disorders, such as depression, were referred to appropriate specialists and were precluded from using the law. So there was no problem there. And we
That's right.
shouldn't have any problem here in Vermont either. And then there's death by race. 97.9% of those who died under the law were Caucasian in Oregon, where there's
Well, that's Oregon. That's
yeah.
a very, although we're an even whiter state, aren't we?
But they have a minority, more minorities than we do.
Yes. Yes.
So it doesn't impact on the minorities. And then death by educational level. It turns out that in Oregon, 68.1% of those who elected hastened death had college degrees or some college education. So it turns out that the more intelligent people are more likely to use it.
Well, better educated.
Better educated, yes. I wouldn't make the presumption that that means they're more intelligent. I think they had a different opportunity for education.
As a college instructor, I never make that mistake.
Well, and I do think, I mean, certainly education informs us in many ways, and one of the ways that it does tell us is in the history of humankind, what choices people have made based on informed choice. So I think that it's logical to me that the more educated you are, perhaps the more appropriate you would see this.
And then there was the question of end-of-life care. Slippery slope proponents said that the poor or disabled would be tempted or forced to commit suicide based on their lack of access to medical care. But in Oregon, this was not a significant factor. Nearly 89% of those who died under coverage of the law were enrolled in the hospice program. So,
It wasn't about avoidance.
yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
That statistic, do that again, because that's important. The percentage this is the percentage of people who actually hastened death medically,
Yeah, 89,
did so in a context of being in hospice.
89%.
Yeah.
I think the other paper said 85%. But anyway, it's a large majority.
I asked you to repeat that because that speaks to this notion that,
Right.
Not everyone who opposes this comes on, slamming the Bible or something. Many people have the very kind, gentle tone, and what they're saying is, I don't want a distraction from hospice. I want us to focus on better, more humane care. And there it is. It's not a distraction from hospice. It is a nexus with hospice care.
Nor can every type of pain be addressed through hospice. And I've had people that I respect deeply and have known for a long time tell me that the only people who are interested in this would be people who are suffering from psychological pain And I respectfully disagree, because I do not think that pain can be divided, and certainly the kind of pain and suffering cannot always be relieved through hospice and palliative care. And as important as I think it is, I just think we need to acknowledge that reality as well.
Well, even on a very practical level, the physician friend of mine whose cell phone went dead when he wanted to prescribe an increase of morphine, and actually decided to go there, and getting stuck in traffic while his patient was suffering.
Yeah.
You know, that he.
Yeah.
But the other thing is that there is pain, physical pain, that is not manageable medically, and some doctors will claim that they can do everything, but others admit they can't. But the other thing is, I mentioned this earlier, it's not just physical pain. It's
Right.
debility, degradation. I mentioned my aunt earlier. My aunt, she always reminded me of Maggie Thatcher. She was just this dignified dowager, this matron, never fully approved of me. And you know, she died helpless. She died,
Yeah.
you know, in a fairly undignified, uncharacteristic way, which she never would have chosen for herself.
Well, I think the dignity part is about control, don't you? I mean,
Yeah.
to me, that's the dignity issue. I mean, some people have said, well, what has dignity got to do with it? And it is very much about autonomy and making choices for yourself, which you've done your entire life. And so why not have that available now?
The other thing, of course, just dignity also in a much less abstract way. Incontinence is a loss of dignity. You know, having someone clean your diapers.
Well, require anybody to have full attention, you know, that you are dependent on somebody and you're a burden to somebody, I think is.
I have a very good friend who is a minister. Her answer to me on that one was, well, then, Dick, we need to redefine human dignity. You don't lose your human dignity when you find yourself in undignified circumstances. And I said, actually, I agree with you on that, but so we're going to impose that ethical judgment on other people? It really is up to the person who is in that situation to make that decision, or will be if we pass this law.
Of the over 500 people that have used the law in Oregon, they did a survey and of the reasons they were doing it. And the number one reason was loss of autonomy. Number two was quality of life. Number three was control of bodily functions, incontinence. And four was unrelieved pain. So we often think of unrelieved pain first, but that was the fourth.
Well, that's why I guess I say autonomy, just that you've lived your life in a certain way, and now you have no control. So,
and this issue of the 89% who are also in hospice, that came up in the Chittenden County Senate debates in October, and where Diane, you and I were both candidates there, and
we agreed, though, right?
Well, on some issues. On some issues.
On this one.
Okay.
Yes, on this issue.
Yeah.
On economic issues, there's a slight difference.
Well, I'm not a conservative in anything, though, Terry.
No.
I just want you to know that.
But the R, that
No,
that stands for
respect.
respect.
Yeah.
Not for Republicans,
Not for me.
even though it's on the ballot. Well, okay. But perhaps you remember that Bob Kiss, when we were talking about death with dignity, he came up with the argument that, what we need is a hospice care. But when I heard that, I felt that, you're holding these people hostage to hostage care. And for him, it's okay if someone suffers immensely at the end of death, because maybe that will encourage other people sometime in the future to make better hospice care. And for me, I'm concerned about the person right now that's suffering. And we need to work on hospice care too, but we have to think about both. And it turns out that in Oregon, people have both.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think we're starting to have much more of that in Vermont for a whole variety of reasons. The people who believe and are the folks who are putting palliative care and hospice care, making it more accessible, are certainly to get the credit. But I think that the more we talk about what happens in life and what happens in the variety of illnesses that can take over any individual now, that we have to have both of those options, and they work together. And I think we have to have compassion for every situation, whether we can understand it or not. So.
And it's also important that in Oregon, after they passed the bill 14 years ago, hospice care improved. So having this bill is not going to harm hospice care.
No, I agree. It will not. Yeah. I think it will continue to improve.
It's all part of a package, which is that we as a society focus on making the last days better. And if you can do that with a comfortable hospice setting and good palliative care, and the patient is satisfied with that,
Right.
then
That's the
you've
choice.
done it,
Right,
then
right.
you're home and fine.
Right.
And certainly that's the optimum. But if the patient has arrived at the point where, yes, everyone has done everything they can, but I'm at the end and I really don't choose to suffer anymore, however the patient defines suffering,
Right.
then this would have us respect that. And probably, as you notice in Oregon, usually in a context of hospice and palliative care.
And the last item on the slippery slope here is the pain management issue, which we mentioned. It says pain is not usually the primary culprit. It ranks 6th in a list of 7 major end-of-life concerns. A loss of autonomy, 91.2%, being less able to engage in activities making life enjoyable, 88.1%, loss of personal dignity, 84.1%, losing control of bodily functions, 56.4%, rated all rated above pain management.
Yeah. Well, all I can say is, as a man who, as a young boy, watched a loved family member die badly, the idea that I would have the option of not doing that. And my sense is I probably would not go gentle into that good night. I think I would probably, I have enough of a revulsion at the idea of no longer being alive. I feel sorry for the world when I imagine it without me. And the idea, the horror I have at the idea of me not being there anymore, I would probably tough it out to the end. I think I would, unless it got to be too. However, the idea that I would have the option of not toughing it out to the end, that I would have the option of, no mas, I think is a great weight off of my shoulder. Just as of the one individual who has been haunted by the specter of what I witnessed as a boy and what I have always feared could happen to me, to have that off my shoulder is a tremendous relief.
My personal view is that I'd like to live forever, but not at any price. And if I'm going to be in a situation with a loss of bodily functions or extreme pain, at that point, I think I no longer want to live forever.
Well, I've said a number of times on this issue that I honestly don't know what choice I might make were I faced with this situation, but that doesn't mean that I can't be certain that it is full of the safeguards that are necessary and that it is the right thing to do.
I want to mention some of the people who agree with us on this, including Senator, your mother,
Yes.
former Lieutenant Governor, former First Lady of Vermont, Barbara Snelling. Dick Mallory, who was a member of Congress from Vermont, one of the early Republican congressmen to go after Richard Nixon.
Madeline Kunin, too.
Yes, I wanted to mention the Republicans first. We've got a long line of Republicans. Bob Gannett, late senator from Windham County, a fine, decent old gentleman. I always told Richard Mallory, who was a neighbor, he lived in Randolph, I lived in Bethel, I said, I am not completely partisan. I'm a pretty loyal Democrat, but I did vote for him. And because of his courage. And then, of course, Madeline Kunin and Phil Hoff, two former Democratic governors. And we've got a pretty impressive list of people who have thought this through pretty carefully and come to the conclusion that it's a good idea.
And whose concerns throughout their lives and in many parts of their lives were directly responsible to the people of Vermont. So, I mean, I just think that it's people who are exposed to the very necessary process of making good laws.
I think the Governor, Peter Shumlin, has also said he will sign
Yes.
the bill.
He
Right?
has.
I believe he has, yes.
Yes. And I think we're going to get him a bill this year. The vote, you know,
Yeah.
you count votes. I can't speak for any of my colleagues, but we have looked around and we're just about there. And it'll be close. It'll not be a landslide in the Senate, although we haven't had the vote yet, maybe. I always wonder about people. I have been in position, not on this issue, but on other issues, where I'm thinking this will be difficult for me to cast this vote, but I will do it if my casting the vote is needed to pass the bill. But I'm not gonna throw myself on my sword if nothing's gonna happen anyway. So depending on the district, we have people whose districts include various religious groups, for example, who are opposed and who may feel just politically, I don't think I want to go there. So it may not just be a close vote. I think we have the votes in the Senate right now to carry this, but
We always face threats to our incumbency, and yet at the same time, we have to make decisions that are based on the responsibilities we have to make the right decision.
I once said to someone who was threatening to have me voted out of office if I didn't vote the way they wanted, I just said, I'm in the prime of my life, I'm an intelligent man with a decent education. If you vote me out of office, I'll find some other way to be of use. And that came out in a letter to the editor. Senator McCormick said he has more education than me, which is not actually what I said. But no, the fact is, why be in the Vermont legislature except to do good work? The pay isn't that great. The people are not falling over themselves to thank us for our service. You do it to pass the best laws you can pass, and hopefully laws that'll make people's lives better. And that's really, at the end of it, that's the measure.
Yes.
Is will people's lives be better? And also the old first do no harm. So the first question is, am I going to hurt people doing this? And I don't think there was ever a serious possibility of people being hurt by it anyway, but the safeguards built into the bill answer that no, we're not doing any harm. Whatever harm theoretically could be done, we've safeguarded against. And then, will this do good? I believe there are people who will suffer less. The dying will suffer less, and those who love them will suffer less, because being around someone you love who's dying
And
is
if
a pretty hard experience.
If comfort is such a large factor in people acquiring the medication but then not using it, that's significantly better as well.
Yeah, well, that's mostly, I think that's the improvement.
Yeah.
Most of the improvement in people's lives will not be hastened deaths. It will be the knowledge of having an opt-out available if necessary. The peace of mind.
Yeah.
And the autonomy, the respect that I'm still in control here.
For me personally, it's the question of pain. That idea of being in tremendous pain at the end of death. I don't like pain, so that's the point at which I would really want to have this available.
Yep.
People might like to know also who when we're mentioning names, who the sponsors of the bill are. One of the other sponsors is Sally Fox, I think, in Chittenden County. And I was really impressed in the debates when she talked about it, that she had cancer, I believe, and a lung removed during the last legislative session. And she said that she had thought of it for herself at one point. And I was really impressed that it was a personal decision for her.
Sally,
Well, I'm pretty
Sally
sure
is brave, and
she's
we
very
love her.
brave, right. I think the entire Chittenden delegation is in support. I know that we have all been sponsors in the past, so.
Yeah. To the question, we have not submitted a bill yet. We're working on the drafting, which is really looking at updates. You know, reference to Oregon 12 years ago has to be updated to Oregon 14 years ago, that kind of thing. But when we have the draft done, we're going to look for co-sponsors. And I'm reluctant to speak for anyone who has not signed on yet. But all I could say is we're going to have a bunch.
My point was only that many people have been co-sponsors in the past.
Jeanette White.
Yes, and my hope is that everybody who is in favor would be a co-sponsor. Therefore, we will see the votes
Yeah.
by the introduction.
Yeah, the entire Chittenden delegation and Jeanette White. So far, I'm flying solo on this in Windsor County. My two seatmates are not supporters, but they're people of great depth and thought, and I'm still
Well, and we still
working on one of them.
We still have the
anyway.
testimony to hear and
Yeah.
the discussion to have. So,
Are there certain areas of the state where opposition is strongest?
I don't think so. I mean, that's why I think there was polling done sort of regionally, and then there was strong support found for the legislation in every part of Vermont.
Besides the high numbers of support, what is interesting are the demographics. It crosses party lines,
Right.
gender, people who describe themselves as conservatives, who describe themselves as liberals. It really is pretty much. There are a couple of people who identify with particular religious designations, and not just one, who perhaps oppose as a group, the majority of this or that group. But for the most part, any demographic subdivision you come up with supports this. Men support it, women support it, liberals support it, conservatives support it.
I wonder why they haven't introduced the bill over in New Hampshire also. You know, with that license plate, give me freedom or give me death, I would think.
Live free or
Live
die.
Live free or die. I would think that this would be a basic element of freedom that they would want.
Well, just keep in mind that New Hampshire, they have something like over 400 and I don't know what in their House of Representatives, and that's a large body of people to get on one path for anything. And I don't know if you've been watching, but I have questioned a number of things that they've done in New Hampshire legislature, and so I'm not entirely sure how that would work. I mean, I agree with you that just by sort of reputation, if you will, you would think that New Hampshire would be interested. But.
New Hampshire's New Hampshire politics are funny because they have this long William Loeb, Manchester Union leader tradition, that particular brand of conservatism. And yet, it's always had a kind of a libertarian tilt to it. Justice
Definitely.
Souter.
Yeah.
And oh, Justice Souter, a conservative from New Hampshire. And of course, he turns out to be, a libertarian conservative, which
Right.
throws him in with the liberals half the time.
Right.
And now you've got New Hampshire actually tilting quite blue on certain issues and then surprising everyone. They're sort of right on the razor's edge.
Yeah, well, I think they
So-
have a lot of people who work in Massachusetts who live in New Hampshire, and that sort of balances out the more rural parts of New Hampshire. So I think we'll see, won't we?
They've made a turn to the left now. They have a woman as the governor, and all of the representatives in Washington are women, I think.
Well, I don't know that just being a woman means you're left, but
No. They're both being,
Tell that to
aggressive.
Michelle Bachmann.
but that might be true, right?
The fact that the people would elect an all-female delegation, though, speaks to a certain progressive
Yes,
mood there.
yes,
Yeah.
you would have so.
I would say New Hampshire's on a razor's edge. They're sort of leaning left, but no, we're not going to really do it. It's back and forth. They're quite balanced, I think. And, maybe if Vermont leads the way, they'll follow.
I hope so.
Yeah.
But I recommend this book to everyone that wants to know more about the issues involved. The title is The Search of Gentle Death, The Fight for Your Right to Die with Dignity. And it's written by Richard N. Cote, who is a journalist, and I just finished reading it, and it's very worth reading. So I recommend that everybody read it.
Now, I understand this program is seen around the state, right?
Yes.
So citizens who have a sympathy for what we're advocating here should be in touch with their state senators. That's
Right.
where the action is going to be first. But also the House representatives, because if we are successful in the Senate, it will, of course, go to the House. And if you have senators who you know are in support, it doesn't hurt to know that you've got support out there. We always hear from people when they're angry with us. It's very nice when you've taken a position for someone to email you or drop you a card and say thank you. It's good to know you got support. But it's also important for people who may be wavering to say, I'm your constituent, and I really hope you'll do this for this reason. And
think it's always important to hear from the people.
Yeah. I mean, that's what they taught us about in 7th grade social studies is either true or it's not, depending on what the people do.
Yes.
I was at the inauguration in Montpelier on Thursday afternoon, and afterwards at 4:30 we had a meet and greet in the legislative cafeteria on the 2nd floor, and so I met my legislature there, Jill Korinsky, and I told her that the most important bill to me in the upcoming session was the Death with Dignity bill, and so she said, "Oh yes. I'm one of the sponsors, or I'm all in favor of that." And but I think it's good, even though she's pushing the bill, to know that she has support of the
Yes.
from the electorate.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We are quite immersed in the legislature when it's in session. And if you only hear from the people who are mad at you, which is usually they're the ones who have the motivation to write to you. After a while, I find every spring I go back home to Windsor County with a little bit of a chip on my shoulder. Oh, if that's the way they feel about it, no, the hell with them. And then people say, "Hey, you did a great job up there," And suddenly, oh, remember Sally Field getting her Academy Award? You like me. You really like me. But it's good to know that your efforts are being watched and being supported.
Well, I'm very grateful because perhaps a little bit more than you have, I do hear from people who appreciate my efforts in Montpelier, as well as the people who have different opinions, and try to hear what they have to say and be genuine in responding to what those needs are.
Yep.
Is there some point in the the legislative session runs from began on Wednesday,
January to the end of April.
to the end of April.
Theoretically.
So
Well, I like to say 4 months.
should the voters be calling every week to their representative, or should they? Is there a point in the term when
They have lives too, So hopefully it isn't that we need to hear every day or every week or every month from people. Whenever it's possible for people to make that effort, it's appreciated.
Yeah, just thank you for your
Yeah.
support of this. It helps.
So it doesn't help to watch and see if when the bill comes up to a vote, and just on the day before the vote, that's the time to.
I think we could have a totally different conversation at another time, perhaps, on how lobbying and advocacy and grassroots organizations are changing politics in Vermont, because I think they are to some extent. And there's a sense that if you bring people and pack the building with people of one mind, that will influence legislators. And I'm not sure it's always works out that way. Sometimes, because we sort of work in a living museum, it makes it hard to do our work. Because I've had on a number of issues people say, well, I took off work today to be here to talk to you, but they didn't tell me that in advance, nor did they know that I'm pretty much tied up in committee all day, so I don't have a whole day to schedule meetings with people, although I would very much like to. And so, I think the more we understand what the task is in Montpelier and how people can make their opinions known, the better it is.
The first day of the session was Wednesday, and we actually did that. At least I was part of a group that did that on Wednesday. It was organized by the Workers' Center in Burlington, and we all had either red or black shirts saying
Right.
Workers' Center, and I wore their slogan was "Put people first." So I wore the button saying "Put people first." And you and I had lunch together.
Yes, we did.
And so you read my button. And,
Yes. But you know what, Terry, here's the wonderful thing. I always put people first. What else is there to put first? Well, it is the people's budget. It's always been the people's budget. And so, on one hand, I say, congratulations, it's wonderful to have this grassroots support for what it is. On the other hand, sometimes they go, well, what do they think we're doing? Because I'm confused about how you could do anything else other than put people first.
But in the morning, we had speeches in room 10 downstairs in the legislature, and they explained in greater detail what that all meant. The idea is that the Workers' Center and the Progressive Party would like to start off the budget discussion by saying, what do people need? How many people are there homeless? How many people need health care?
Is that what you do at home? Do you start with all the things that you want? Because the money is finite. There's only so much money. And if you start with everything that people need, you will never have enough money. So to some extent, you have to find the priorities that put people first within the money that you have. Because if money were no object, we would have everything, but we know we don't.
But money isn't really that big an object, but when you consider that Peter Shumlin has $10 million, and many of us, like me, don't have it anywhere near that amount. So if
Nor do I.
If you take
Nor does Senator McCormick that I'm aware of.
If you change the tax system so that people who have $10 million can pay at a 90% tax rate, and people who have...
Where's the incentive? So what, if all you do in government, and that's why I'm saying this is a whole other conversation, but...
It's a whole other conversation, it is.
Terry and I could go on, but I'm not sure we should.
We did that in the Senate debates.
Well, our Republican senator and progressive may not entirely agree on budgeting, but we do agree on death with dignity, right?
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Yep.
Because it's not an economic issue, it's an issue of freedom, and we all support freedom.
But Terry, I do need to tell you, because I think you understand this, is that from the very beginning of my service in Montpelier, I have been very focused on human services. And I have been an advocate forever for the people. So
Some of whom find themselves in dire circumstances at the end of life
yes,
and need to maintain
yes.
control of their fate.
But in Burlington, we appreciate what you've done, too, because we've elected 5 Democratic senators and 1 Republican. So we recognize that you aren't...
Well, I guess I would just add to that I made it very clear, tried to make it very clear during the election, that I don't really represent the Republican Party. I represent the people of Chittenden County. And I have come to the conclusion that as many Democrats and progressives, perhaps maybe not as many progressives, but as many Democrats as Republicans elected me. Therefore, when I serve, it's not by a party. And that was our beginning joke about the R equals respect, because I say that I am a Republican based on the respect I have for my parents and what they were able to achieve in Vermont as Republicans. And I'm very grateful to have come today to have this conversation with Senator McCormick and with you, Terry, about a very important issue.
Yes, I appreciate both of you coming.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Keep those cards and letters coming in, folks.
And for our viewers at home, thank you for tuning in, and I hope that you'll tune in again next time for another issue of Vermont Today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.